Welcome to Insider's Insight podcast, where we dissect everything social media. I'm Teodora Lozanzas, marketer at Socialinsider, and your host for this show, excited to get into the nitty-gritty of everything social media. I'll talk to social media professionals that work in freelance, in-house for a company, and in an agency environment to get the best of all worlds. Which is a nicer way of saying we'll snoop around and see how others do it. Let's jump in. I'm here with Mohamed El-Dali, Social Media Director at Create Media Group in Dubai. Mohamed has been tackling social media since 2011 while working for a number of advertising agencies and companies, giving him a unique perspective on how to best manage social media for different segments and different audiences. With 9 years of experience under his belt, Mohamed spends his time devising social strategies, overseeing content creation, and developing digital campaigns for his clients. And he's built an impressive arsenal of more than 100 brands across the Middle East, including Microsoft, Google, L'Oreal, Coca Cola, Nestle, or GoPro. Thanks for joining me, and thanks for accepting to talk about this B2C versus B2B environment and how companies from each of these areas have to behave and post and react on social media. But let's start with telling people a little bit about yourself. So how did you start your career and how did you start off in social media?
Yeah, of course. First of all, again, thanks for having me. I've been a big fan of Socialinsider for quite a while. Basically, I joined social media around 2010. It was something I did back in college to start with. It was something very new, of course. Basically, a friend just told me we're doing this for a popular TV channel back in the day. It's called Rutana. It's very popular in the Middle East. It was basically just launching their social media account. And for me, that was very exciting. I didn't know much about the field back then. And I joined that company to start the social media channels. We started by doing the basics, of course, in terms of community management, replying to people, like posting and preparing calendars for whatever the schedule is going to be. And it just kind of took off from there. I was still studying, but working in the field and starting in the social media space just gave me that passion towards that career in general and that industry. And of course, it was something a bit baffling to a lot of like friends and family, is like, you're just spending time on Facebook. How's that job, Of course, that misconception has started to, die off a little bit with people now seeing how important social media is, especially in the last couple of years. And of course, the rise of digital agencies and digital in general, especially with the new age of Corona. So yeah, I've been in the career since then.
So you've been a social media specialist ever since?
Yes.
What about being a social media director? What does that imply?
So of course, over the past 9 to 10 years, I've been working in the space and just like climbing the ladder, doing everything from, like we said, the community management, the posting, the scheduling, and then slowly and a bit by bit, just starting to work on the strategy of the accounts. Why are we doing such things? What's the business objective? And starting to think of the bigger picture. It's not just about social media posts. It's about what are the business goals of the brand? What are the brand trying to achieve by being on social media? Which platforms should we be on? What kind of audience are we trying to reach out to, So as I said, slowly and a bit by bit, I grew in my role, and now I've been a social media director for the past, I think, 5 years or so. Two and a half of these is at my current role, which is at Create Media. So what that job entails is basically managing a big team of currently 30 people who work across many different accounts. So making sure that when we onboard a new client or any existing client, that we prepare a proper social media strategy for them. And then a big part of my role, of course, is to make sure that we amplify or apply that social media strategy, and also make sure that we're always on top of new trends, new platforms, dealing with the team in terms of client servicing, helping them on that, holding like the meetings and the brainstorms across each and every account per month. So yeah, that's what the job entails.
What would be the one skill that a social media director must absolutely have?
I would say people management. It's really, really important to make sure that you have the basics right, and to have that kind of also empathetic mindset in terms of managing people. It's really important also for the social media director to have been gone through the ranks, someone who's done it all before. Because a good leader or a good director is someone who actually leads by example and not just someone who sits back and watches other people do the work. So it's really essential for, as any social media director, I would say, to have the knowledge of the job, have the technical knowledge of doing any aspect of the job, because you're going to be facing a lot of questions from the team. So you need to be able to either have done this yourself or to have an understanding of how it's done in order to direct the team better.
What about on the other side? What's the portrait of a social media candidate that you would never work with, despite a lot of talent, perhaps, like big character or professional flaws they might have?
That's a great question. And it's definitely something that we discuss quite often when we do interviews. And I always like to say that you can teach skills, but you can't teach attitude. If someone is passionate enough and someone actually has the right attitude towards the job and towards what they're about to encounter with us in terms of dealing with the clients, understanding the social media atmosphere, being on top of everything in regarding to trends and platform updates, that's the right attitude to have. And of course, in terms of the culture of the agency itself, it's someone who fits in, someone who can deal with people with respect and in a nice way. Anything else regarding technical abilities and skills can be taught. But like I said, I think attitude is one of the most difficult things that can be changed.
What do you think it takes to create successful social media campaigns? Are there any bullet points that you follow or certain steps that you always try to achieve along the way?
Yeah, of course. So when we encounter any like social media campaign, it's very important from the start to set the objectives, and not just like any general objectives and KPIs. They need to be what we like to call SMART objectives. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. That will make sure that the objectives you set from the start and these goals that you're working towards are very specific. They actually are very customizable according to your business needs, according to the audience that you're trying to reach, whether it's a B2C audience or a B2B audience, or what kind of segmentation you need to do in terms of that audience. It's also very important to not deal with social media platforms as one blank page, basically. It's really important to have what we call a content strategy. So what are we going to do on each social media platform? Because replicating the same content in terms of the content itself as visual assets and also the message itself, it can't be just replicated across the different social media platforms. It needs to be customized according to what audience do we have on each platform, or what's that type of platform, or how is the nature of that platform in general.
Okay, so a common mistake you might say would be just considering each platform as a blank channel. What are some other mistakes that usually happen in the B2B versus B2C spectrum?
I would say the biggest mistake here is someone who doesn't actually identify that they have different audience segments. They kind of put their strategy and their social media campaigns to reach one large audience. Of course, in some certain situations that would be applicable in terms of like big reach or awareness. But if we're talking about most social media campaigns, they need to have specific goals and you need to have specific audiences as well. If we're running that campaign on Facebook, what kind of audience are we trying to reach on that platform versus if we're running it on Instagram versus TikTok, for example. So that's a very important thing. And also, like you said, identifying if we have B2C and B2B audiences. Some brands do have services or products that cater for both audiences. So it's really important to analyze that you have something to offer for both audiences. And then what's the message you're going to reach out to the both of them? Because you can't sell to the B2C audience the same way you sell to the B2B audience, even if it's the same product.
Exactly. Let's talk a bit about the main differences when approaching social media for B2B companies versus B2C brands. What should be the main goals of each of these segments, and what should be the strategy behind the content calendar?
Of course. So let's go back to what we just said about setting the objectives and also the audience themselves. So if we're talking about a B2C brand, we're talking about a product or a service that we're selling to a wider public and individuals. Anyone can just like buy that product or subscribe to a service, while the B2B is mainly focused on businesses. So we can't just talk to both of them in the same way, like we spoke. So it's very important to set the objectives if we're trying to reach the individuals from the B2C perspective. What kind of message are we going to put out to reach these individuals? And also the platforms. You can't just consider your different social media platforms to reach the same audiences in the same way. If we're talking about LinkedIn and Twitter, for example, they're much better suited towards a B2B audience other than like businesses who cater only for B2C. That's not a general rule, of course, because I've seen a lot of successful B2B companies who have very strong Instagram presence, for example. But it's just something to consider. What kind of platform is the best for me as a B2B or a B2C brand? So setting these objectives and understanding our audience from the start would be very important. Of course, I would definitely advise of doing a social media listening exercise at the start to understand what kind of sentiment does the audience have on not just my product, but our industry, whatever your service is, and whatever that industry is. Just understand what are people looking for in that space. Social media now is a very much value-focused industry. People are very selective about what kind of accounts they're following on any platform, especially on platforms like Instagram and Facebook, when they changed the algorithm a couple of years ago to prioritize more like friends and family more than brands. So now when you log into Facebook, you see more like groups content and video content, and not necessarily so much like brands and ads like before. So that's something all brands need to consider, because what kind of value or what kind of addition I'm giving to the audience in order for them to follow me or click that ad or follow my campaign. So that's one of the main things to consider as well. What am I adding to people's lives, basically, in order for them to engage and follow me on social media?
What about the goals? What are the typical goals for a business-to-business company versus the business-to-community brand?
Yeah. So, of course, we can say that the main goal for both of them would always relate to business objectives, right? If I'm selling a product or a service, my main objective would be conversion, most of all, just to make sure that I'm selling my product and I'm getting my message across in that regard. But the secondary objectives are the ones that are going to differ a little bit. If we're talking about a B2C audience, then of course awareness would be a very good objective in terms of educating the audience about what kind of products and services I have. Engagement would be another very important objective, because that's also a common trait of B2C audience. But if we're talking about a B2B audience, I'm not really looking for them to engage with me on social media as much as the B2C audience. The more importance here would be towards an objective like lead generation, for me to connect with them on a deeper level, take their contact details and have my customer care team contact them, for example. So that would be a very important objective or goal when it comes to B2B audience. So like I said, I think the primary audience would always be towards the business goals. What am I trying to achieve in general, not just from social? And then identifying the secondary goals according to what kind of audience am I trying to reach and the goals for the specific platform.
Hi there! If you're curious to learn more about the life of a social media manager, I have just the show for you. Maria Ganza, my lovely colleague at Socialinsider, gathered the insights of 25 social media professionals and created the portrait of your day-to-day social media manager in her free ebook. We talk about what she learned from them in our very first Insider Insights episode. Just scroll down for the link. Do you have any tips on how to successfully get to know a brand's audience? And what tactics do you use to understand their behavior or a company's buyer persona?
Yes, very good question. So we would definitely start with doing that social media listening exercise that we spoke about. Just analyzing people's conversations in the wider social space. What kind of sentiment do they have against the brand, but also against the industry in general? If we're talking about specific product, let's say, for example, I don't know, toilet paper, okay? If a company is selling that product, they need to understand when people buy that certain product, do they go to a certain brand? What are the sentiment in general around that product? What are people saying on each platform in specific? Because your Twitter audience is going to go on Twitter, for example, to reach out to a brand, to complain about something or to get information about the service. But your Instagram audience is more likely to engage with the brand. Your Facebook audience is more likely to write a review about the brand or get in touch with them via Messenger. So it's also important to keep in mind that you have the different sentiment across the different platforms. So that's the first thing. The second thing is definitely to check out the competitor pages. What kind of content are they putting out, and how is the audience engaging with them? Competitor analysis is always definitely a big part of any social media and content strategy, just to understand what are you lacking in terms of your other competitors, and what are your strength points as well in order to capitalize on them.
I'm also really interested in finding out the agency's perspective when it comes to gaining clients on both sides. Can you give me a few pointers on the strategy behind the pitches for companies that work in the business to business versus business to community area?
Yeah. So I would say the B2C pitches are mostly focused on like content. How are we going to engage the audience? How are we going to build a community? And of course, still with a focus on business goals and social media, e-commerce, or selling if it's effective. But when it comes to B2B pitches, it's more focused on what kind of thought leadership we're going to offer or what we can do for this brand in order for them to stand out from the rest. Still, again, focused on business objectives as a whole. Are we trying to collect leads? Are we trying to push traffic to the website? But of course, an element of thought leadership will definitely need to be there. That would be in the form of maybe putting out content pieces in the form of videos, whether it's interviews, animated infographics. Sometimes it's just like writing blog pieces from key stakeholders and C-level suites. So it's just taking the business itself and seeing what they can offer for that industry on social in order for them to stand out. Also, another element that would be more related to B2B businesses is an employee advocacy program. The biggest advocates always sit within your company. You have your workforce who can advocate for your brand online. And this is something often people don't really make a good use of, while it's one of the easiest tactics you can do. So this is definitely one of the tips I would advise everyone in the B2B space to utilize. You have to have some sort of employee advocacy program in place. That could be in the simplest form of just making sure that employees understand the importance of social media. They follow your company's accounts on social and engage with it. And also going a level deeper and having someone in-house dedicated to covering what's it like to work in this company. What's the life? What's the atmosphere? What's the environment? Because that will also help with the talent acquisition side of things, but it will showcase to everyone what kind of culture is your company doing. And that ultimately will also affect your consumers, because people don't want to buy from businesses they don't know about anymore. People now with the social media age are very involved. They understand and they make conscious decisions about what businesses they deal with. And you see a lot of people actually make conscious decisions on switching from one brand to another, because they say that other brand is more sustainable, or they have a better working environment, or they give better rights to their employees, So it's really important in this day and age to cover that side of things, to showcase what are your company values. And then if we take it even one level deeper, like we spoke, it's engaging with the thought leaders within the organization itself, activating them in terms of writing blog pieces, writing thought pieces, but also activating their own social media accounts and reposting from them, creating that sort of like ecosystem on social where the company has opinion pieces published by its CEO, by its C-level suites, and they're engaging with it from a company account, reposting from it, and then the employees are engaging with these pieces, writing their own comments, putting out their own content on their social platforms as well. So imagine if you have a company of over 600 people and you do that sort of employee advocacy program. If you manage only to engage like 50% of them, that's a much wider reach and much wider engagement than you can get by not engaging them, basically. It's just a very easy tool to utilize that most people are not thinking about.
So are these suggestions something that you typically do for your clients? Are there many conversations in which you guide them towards one direction or other?
Yes, 100%. So as I mentioned, we always suggest it as a tactic that we absolutely need to use. And then according to what we can facilitate with the client in terms of, are we able to get articles written or opinion pieces written by the CEO and the C-level suites or not? Are we able to do interviews with different stakeholders and department heads? Are we able to do some behind the scenes from different company activities and different programs that they have in-house? But it's definitely something that we help with, and sometimes even suggest as part of the scope that we can basically do these elements or cover these activations in order to ensure that we have a strong employee advocacy program in place.
And what do you typically promise in terms of results? Are there any differences how you approach results benchmarks on a B2C company versus a B2B company?
I would say the variable element here is not really the two industries versus each other, as more as it's paid media in general. Are the clients willing to invest in paid media or not? And what kind of budget are they willing to commit to? Because as you know, social media platforms right now, most of them are just pay to play, especially now with like Facebook and Instagram. The organic reach is lower than 5%, sometimes even lower than 1%. So of course, we have a lot of tactics to overcome these things and make sure that we do have a strong organic reach. But it's really important, and it's something that we always advise our clients. We have to have a strong paid media strategy in place, even if it's not a huge budget, but at least it's a fixed budget to make sure that we're reaching a wider audience. Once we identify what kind of paid media strategy we're going to have in place, what kind of objectives are we going to run these ads on, from that comes the KPI settings, because if we're agreeing to reach a specific audience in terms of lead generation, for example, or conversion to the website, then the KPI setting would be according to these objectives. How many leads are we going to collect per month? How many people are we going to lead to the website? How many purchases are we promising for the website, for example?
Do you have any examples of B2B accounts that perform very well, or B2B and B2C content that is done right?
Of course, yeah. So let's tackle the B2B first. I think a company like General Electric has been doing a really good job on social. When you think of General Electric, you don't necessarily think, this is a company that's very active on social media, but they are, and they've been for a good couple of years. I've been following them on many social media accounts. You look at their Instagram, they offer storytelling approach to a lot of the content that they do, or a lot of the services that they offer. And they also have a lot of like behind the scenes of how their employees perform their different jobs. You get that insider look into the company, and they put out a lot of educational content as well. Another good example of that would be MailChimp, which is a tool for email communication. MailChimp have been active on social media since I can ever remember, to be honest. And they're very on top of it. When they see a specific trend or when they see changes in a social platform, I would say I've seen that they're one of the first to apply these changes. So if you look at their Instagram account, once you land on it, you don't really recognize that this is a B2B company or this is a tool, The content they offer is very colorful. You can also see that insider look into the company and what they do, the culture they have in there.
Going back a little bit to platforms, what would you suggest that is the best platform to focus on for business to business, except of course LinkedIn, which is typically a favorite?
So this is going to sound surprising to a lot of people, but I would say actually Instagram. And the reason for that is Instagram over the last couple of years has really changed from like a food/influencer focused platform to a very educational platform. A lot of businesses have taken that shift, and you can see a lot of big brands like National Geographic or NASA, they invest a lot of time and effort into putting very educational content on Instagram. And the reason for that is people are hungry for that kind of content. And like we spoke, people are very selective, especially on Instagram, about what kind of brands they follow, because they only follow the brands who add value to their lives, who are going to offer them something different. So people are hungry for that kind of content on Instagram. They want to be educated on different things. They want to feel in the now. A lot of people actually now get their news from Instagram versus if you ask people like a couple of years ago, which social platform do you get your news from? And always the number one answer is Twitter. That has now changed. The platform focus itself has changed. The audience priorities have changed. The way they go on the platform and they use the platform is very different. So I would say Instagram is a great tool because, of course, like we can go on for hours and hours about how important the Instagram audience is, the number of monthly active users on the platform. It's just it's something that everyone is using. So The audience is already there. It's just about how are you going to reach them with content that appeals to them by offering them value.
Okay. So do you have any tips on how a company that has a business to business audience would perform best and most efficiently on Instagram?
Sure, of course. And I think the first step here would also be to identify what content pillars and what audience are we trying to reach on that specific platform. So that would be the first step. But then if we talk about tips in terms of the content itself, then I would say definitely more on the educational level, educating people about not just your services, because that's still more of brand awareness, but also putting educational pieces about that industry you're in. Anything that you see as a trending conversation, you need to jump on it in one way or another by offering educational content. Instagram stories is a great tool to do that, as well as IGTV, because you can put out interview pieces, for example. One brand that does this very well is World Economic Forum. You land on the account and all you can see is top-notch educational content, and it's content that you consume on the go. It's very snackable content for Instagram audience, but you walk away from that video or that piece of content with something that has added value to your life, you know? So that would be my tip for most of the B2B audiences who are looking to get on Instagram. It's not about selling your product or service necessarily. That is definitely a very important objective, but your overall content strategy needs to be around what the audience wants to see.
And what about the business to community segment? What's the most efficient platform for these types of companies?
So for B2C, because it's a much wider conversation, I would say it really depends on the product. We've seen a lot of brands utilize TikTok, for example, in such a creative way that they haven't been able to do on other platforms, you know? So I would say there's no like specific answer here, or there's no platform that really stands out to be like, this is definitely the B2C platform to be on, because it really goes back to what we talked about. What kind of audience are we trying to reach here? And then from identifying that audience, we see what kind of similarities does this audience have with the different platforms. So if you're trying to reach a younger audience, of course, TikTok is one of the trendy platforms at the moment with a big wide reach in a lot of regions. If we're talking about like a millennial audience with purchase power, then of course we're still talking about Instagram as a very strong platform in that perspective. Facebook is still a leading global platform. A lot of people actually have seen that in content strategies. They ignore Facebook or they put it as a secondary platform, while we see month after month that Facebook is still the leading social platform in terms of numbers. And now with its focus on video content and pushing that through the video tab, also the focus on communities and building a community through Facebook groups, it's also something else to consider. So again, for B2C, I would say it really goes back to what kind of product or service do you have, what kind of audience you're trying to reach, and from that, identifying which platform would be best for your industry and your brand.
Right. You mentioned TikTok. So what's your take on TikTok? Do you think there's a specific type of brands that usually thrive there? Or do you think it's a general thing and any brand can go on TikTok and be successful?
Honestly, I think any brand can do it. The only variable is the content, not the kind of brand. The only exception from that rule, I would say, maybe if your brand image would be at risk if you are on a platform like TikTok. Maybe if your brand is more towards the luxury, for example, if you are on TikTok, maybe some of your audience would perceive it in the wrong way. So that would be the only exception. But other than that, I would say in general, TikTok is such a strong platform for any brand to be on. It just depends on what kind of content you're looking to do on there. Because if your plan is to take whatever content you're producing for Instagram and publish it on TikTok, then that's definitely not going to work. TikTok really asks for original content. The audience is looking for authentic content, and that's the kind of content they consume. If you're just replicating content that you have in other platforms and putting it on there, you're not going to see that kind of success. So it's very important to understand what kind of content are we offering on that platform that really taps into what the audience is looking for. But also, I would say one of the strongest parts of doing that is collaborating with content creators on the platform, because they know the platform. They know what the audience wants to see. They have a huge following because of it, you know? So if you're looking to be on TikTok and have a presence there, maybe one of the things you need to consider first is, do I need to be on there myself? Am I willing to have a content strategy specifically for TikTok? Or is it best to collaborate with content creators and they can do that for me through their creativity and through their wide reach as well?
Some of the goals that TikTok has is to, first of all, age their demographics and age the user base, and also facilitate collaborations between brands and influencers. Do you think that if they move forward with these goals and achieve them, it would be easier for brands to succeed and thrive on TikTok, or is the current state of the platform already engaging enough?
I think I would have had a different answer if this was maybe like 4 months ago. But now that TikTok has moved really into the self-serve ad solution, I would say no, it's very easy now for any brand to have that kind of like business goals on the platform, because you can serve ads like any other platform that you have. The only thing that TikTok asks you to do is to make sure that your content, even if it's an ad, actually speaks to the audience on TikTok. So that's the only barrier to entry, basically. If you're not willing to speak to that young audience in the way they want to be spoken to, then this is not your platform. Any other factor, I think it's very much the same as any other social platform.
Let's talk a little bit more about content. How different is social media content for each segment, meaning for business to business versus business to community? And this is in regards to organic versus paid content, or using more stories versus using more regular posts on all platforms, of course.
So if we're talking about the B2B industry, of course, you need to utilize the paid media aspect of things, or like the dark ads, more towards very direct objectives. So your dark ads need to cater towards your direct business goals, while your social media platforms need to focus on what we talked about in terms of the educational part of things. I'm not looking to follow a brand on social anymore because they want to sell to me all the time. So as a B2B brand, people need to consider this, like what kind of value am I offering to the audience on each platform? LinkedIn Stories is also a very strong addition to the platform, where you can serve your audience that snackable content that they can consume on the go. We've seen LinkedIn has become a very active platform, especially in 2020. It's because of sad reasons, of course, because of the current job market and people losing their jobs. But we've seen also a lot of people have built a community on LinkedIn. People are supporting each other more than before. So this is something also as a sign to brands. This is another platform where you can build a community around a topic in your industry or something around the services that you do. So LinkedIn groups is a good way to do that. LinkedIn showcase pages, of course, if you have like a sub brand or a sub service. But utilizing, like we said, video contents is really important on the platform. LinkedIn Stories is a great tool. If we're talking about the other social media platforms, so Twitter would be a great way to keep your audience in the now. Twitter is all about these conversations, what's happening right now in terms of news, announcements. Even how you phrase your message needs to be very different from LinkedIn to Twitter. And if we're talking about, of course, Instagram, then how are we going to use stories to publish a similar content that informs and educates, not to replicate the same thing we're doing on LinkedIn, but very much appealing to an Instagram audience versus the B2C. So B2C, we have a lot of different elements to consider. First of all, where are we most active? Of course, generally, you need to have like a good diversity of different social media platforms and different content, but you need to have a hero platform that you focus on. And this is where your community is, and this is where most of your audience is. A very interesting stat that I always go back to is we scroll the same height of the Empire State Building every single day. We scroll that distance on our phones every single day. So can you imagine the amount of content you go through as a user? So you need to think about that as a brand. A term I like to use is thumb-stopping content. What's going to stop me from scrolling through all of that content to look at your content out of all that? What are you trying to serve me different?
What about the ads? What type of ads work best and on which platform?
I would go about that question by saying we need to have a strong paid media strategy in place that tackles two things. First thing is the dark ads, which will cater to my direct business objectives. So the dark ads will send people to my website or collect leads, for example. But another strong element that a lot of brands are not considering is what hero content pieces am I boosting every month or optimizing for reach or video views in order to reach a wider audience. It's really important not to get too focused just on the business objectives and ignore the objectives which will help me grow my social media following, increase my engagement with my audience, and build a community. So it's really important when you put a calendar to have some sort of hero content pieces in place that you need to boost or optimize for views or reach for a wider audience to see that content. And also another thing to consider, which a lot of people are not using. You've seen when you manage a page or an Instagram account, you get a notification from the platform themselves telling you that your post is performing better than, I don't know, like a certain percentage of the posts that you've been posting. This is a really good indication because the way the Facebook and Instagram algorithm works is once your post is live, it gets served to a test audience. If that test audience reacts to it well, then Facebook and Instagram are going to show it to a wider audience. If they don't interact with it well, then the reach is going to be very low. That's a good indication for you to understand if your content is doing well or not organically. And if it's doing well organically, you need to capitalize on that and boost that post or create an ad around it, because it's a good indication that your audience likes that content. So it would perform even better if you put some paid media behind it and reach a wider audience with it.
Okay. How much do you rely on analytics? And is there a difference on how you approach metrics for these two segments?
100%. I think analytics are no longer something optional. Every brand needs to be looking into their analytics, but not just in terms of analyzing the numbers and like, this is what we've done this month. Let's move to the next month. It's really a pit stop for you. You need to analyze the numbers, see what's working for your audience, what's not working, and that needs to feed directly into your content strategy. The content strategy or the social media strategy in general is not something like brand guidelines that you prepare and it sits in a document. It's something that actually changes every single month. So you need to understand that whatever works for your audience now may not work a year from now because of how social media is in general and how trends go on and how the behavior of people and how they use social media really differs from one period to another. It's really important to look at the analytics every month, have that feed into your content strategy. So I would say with B2B, analytics are more around like the KPIs, and of course to inspire the content strategy, but even more so with content when it comes to B2C.
Okay, so next up we have the fire round, which is a small section in which I'll be laying out 2 or 3 terms and or scenarios. And you pretty much need to choose the one that you believe in the most and you think is most appropriate.
Okay.
So, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter for B2C.
Instagram and TikTok.
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or Twitter for B2B.
LinkedIn and Twitter.
Which is the easiest to manage, B2B or B2C?
B2C for sure, but I would say B2B sometimes can be more fun.
LinkedIn for B2C, yay or nay?
Yay, but depending on the brand.
Instagram for business to business, yay or nay?
Yes, definitely yes.
Formal or informal tone of voice for business to business?
Depends on the platform, but mostly formal.
Which is better, bold messages or conservative posts?
Definitely bold.
Stories or regular posts?
I think stories is a faster way to reach the audience.
Videos or images as content?
Videos.
Brand ambassadors, yay or nay?
Yay.
Paid versus organic?
Unfortunately paid.
TikTok for brands, yay or nay?
Yay, but I would say more by using content creator.
YouTube for brands, yay or nay?
100% yay.
So it's for both B2B and B2C?
100%.
Okay. As a final questions, tell me a little bit about your plans and Create Media's plans for the future. What should people be looking forward to?
Yeah, it's a very exciting time for us right now because we have our offices in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. We opened our office in Saudi Arabia earlier this year, and we're currently opening our office in Egypt as well. So that's very exciting for us. We have been working with a lot of different sectors, focusing mainly on government and semi-government accounts. We're really expanding now in terms of our focus on content and data and analytics. This has been something that the agency has been focusing on a lot in the last period, and it's just linking everything back together because you have a lot of great like social media agencies who work on creating great content, but then they're not able to close the loop in terms of how does this content perform? What do we take away from that? And how do we serve the business objectives overall? I think we're in a good position of offering all of these services. So we do social, we do digital, we can create e-commerce solutions, we do email marketing, and we have a very strong production house in terms of our sister company, Create Production. We kind of can close the whole loop. Right now, we're really focused on building out our data and analytics services as well, in order to make sure that everything we do on these services is being linked back to how did this perform? What does this mean for this specific audience? And then having that feed into the content strategy.
That's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it and learned something new about what it takes to create successful social media strategies for both the business-to-business and business-to-community landscape. Hope this new information helped you master B2B and B2C brands on social media and gave you some ideas about how to tweak your own campaigns and strategies. You can find Mohamed and the Create Media Group on social media with the links below, as well as our own Socialinsider team. And don't forget to check out our blog for more social media info and database findings. Until next time, keep an eye on those insights.